sadgamaya tamasoma jyotirgamaya mrityurmamritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. We used to have Sanyasa vows at the convent in Hollywood. And I was the one that kind of led the chanting. And I swear, every time we got to that translation, I would say, lead us from the real to the unreal. In the middle of sannyasa vows, right. So, the question is, now what? We know about this, so what? 4 words. Viveka, vichara, abhyasa, vairagya. All words we hate to hear if we know the translation and we don't really think about it. So we have been doing viveka and vichara. It's not just for jnanis. Viveka is ordinarily translated as discriminating varieties of things, mostly between the unreal and the real, between the changing and the unchanging, etc. So what does that really mean? It means that we deconstruct. It means that we look at everything and try to determine for ourselves whether or not we are accepting a construct as reality. Does that make sense? Time. What is it? Is there such a thing?
No.
Right, but it appears to be so. Space. What is it? Is there such a thing as space? It's a designation. Self. Actually, even the words real and unreal, which of course scriptures like the Ashtavakra Samhita will take to the limit. What liberation? What non-liberation? In other words, understanding that these things are purely conventional constructs. And they aren't things. They're ways that we construct our experience and are able to talk about it and use it. But they don't exist in their own nature. Formless. So viveka is constantly looking at the world with this kind of curiosity. Oh, so what is it really? That I had a wonderful experience, actually. My guru was Swami Swahananda, and I was one of his sevaks. I was one of his attendants. And he was very good at testing out his attendants, like most teachers are. And it involved, and he was interested in testing people's detachment. Okay, so you can imagine what that means. That as you get better at not reacting to what he is doing, he has to turn up the heat. And so to get you to the point where he's pushed you where you react. And so that you can see it and then say, ah. Or say, bah, good. So he pushed me to the point, finally, after many, many years, and I have to say, I think he wasn't feeling well that day also, to where I absolutely became infuriated, and so did he. And he threw me out and said, get out and don't come this side again. Oh, I was so upset. And I went on for days boiling about this. And suddenly one day, when I was not thinking about anything, I suddenly realized, for me to be angry, my mind, I had to accept in my mind a whole lot of assumptions to be true. That what is the role of a teacher? What is the role of a student? Who am I? Who is he? What are we doing here? What is this? What is that? I had to accept them. Yes, 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 yes. And I saw in the flash that not a single one of those things was real. It was all a structure, a fake structure of assumptions and things that I had never questioned. And it all fell down in a moment, and I saw, oh, this is how we construct our entire reality. So that's a kind of a sudden viveka. That's what we need to do, is question our existence in whatever way we like to. That even goofy things, a sense of wonder, a sense of curiosity. That maybe when you were a child, like I did, you looked at the ceiling and said, what if the ceiling was actually the floor? That what if time was lived backwards? What if? And what that does is free one's mind from being stuck in a certain understanding. That's questioning. What are the terms here that I'm accepting? So that's viveka. Is it true? And of course, many modern teachers, this is also vichara, this relentless self-inquiry. And not as a horrible kind of thing, but in the spirit of curiosity, in the spirit of, what if? Let's say, do you remember when you were a child and you were playing with your friends? How often did we construct an imaginary world? Well, let's say you're the mother and you're the father. And let's say that we're at such and such a place. And then go and act the whole thing out. And that's what we're doing here. Let's say I'm this person and you're that person, etc. So in the spirit of that kind of play, we undo it. Let's say we're not. So vichara, this kind of interest in, well, who am I and is this real? Is this true? Many of the modern teachers, both in the Asian traditions and now it's come into the actually not religious tradition anymore, are now from every angle, when you talk to any religious tradition, there's some kind of understanding that the core of all this is the question, is it true? That who am I? That however it's put into the language of whatever religious tradition it is, the understanding that mindfulness and attention need to be there to understand it. So, is it true? That person fell asleep in the chair because they're being rude. The first thing I do, instead of just automatically assuming that, is ask myself, is that true? Can I absolutely know that this is true? Oh, that person is just being rude. Well, the truth is, no matter what it is, I can't absolutely know. If it's talking about an object that's not coming from within myself, I do not ever absolutely know why anyone does anything. And so then understanding, okay, so if I think that person is being rude, how am I behaving? Well, I'm starting to get frustrated and maybe a little bit angry. And if that person wasn't being rude, would I behave like that? No. So where is it? It's all inside. So that kind of thing, that's vichara. And what we're doing here, viveka vichara, is training, instead of our mind just jumping on the next habitual reaction, to stand back and say, what if? Or what is this? That moment. Catching the moment between when my karma comes up, my actions come up, my experience comes up, and I react to it, stopping, instead of just letting it flow right on top of me without just automatically acting. So viveka vichara installs that program in my head. The more I use it, the better it runs. So we have to install that app. that the Viveka Vichara app that acts like a door watcher before I automatically respond to something in a habitual way. Abhyasa, practice. These are the Yoga Sutra words, Abhyasa and Vairagya. Practice means exactly that. We have to work at it. We have to do it over and over and over again to make that app work pretty well. Otherwise, we won't even remember to open that app. That what we want that app to do, at first, okay, let's use this analogy. At first, we have to open the new app in our mind. We have to remember to stop and observe. We have to remember somehow not just automatically react. But the more we remember, the more the app auto opens. That right now what's auto-loading is the habitual program, right? Whatever it is for each one of us. The things that we ordinarily think in the way that we ordinarily think, that's auto-loading for us. And we want to stop that auto-load. We want to be able to load what we want to load. And so in order to do that, we have to install these new apps, and then we have to run them so that they're running, they're the ones that auto-load. That's abhyasa, that's practice. We need to do these things over and over again, not just in our meditation, but also in our daily life. Because we can't somehow make this distinction between when we're sitting in meditation and daily life as if they're two different things. What we want is to bring our meditation into daily life. And we need the both of them to do that. We can't just say, oh, well, why meditate then? If we don't need it, we can just do it in daily life. Well, that doesn't work so well either. Because our minds are so used to going to the next thing, we'll be distracted. Guaranteed. So, abhyasa, vairagya, oh, this is the word we really hate. This is for monks. Viraga, vairagya. Raga, viraga, vairagya. Raga, this, what we've been talking about mostly. Longing, attachment, greed, etc., aversion. We can put it all under the label raga. All these programs that catch us up. And viraga means over it. I'm over it. That without raga, and of course vairagya is the noun that means that's my quality of life now. That these things are not caught, I am not caught by these things anymore. I'm without being snagged by all these habits. So vairagya, renunciation. So, what do we renounce? Got an idea?
Ego, everything.
All of that. Not everything. We make a habit. We renounce those things that are catching us up. So we can start with renouncing what we say, destructive emotions, disturbing emotions. That we renounce everything that we feel is getting in our way to the experience of our higher nature. And we can give it all up at once, but it won't work. So it's an attitude more than anything. An attitude that auto-loads, yet again, in our mind, whenever we are at the level of choice. And so everyone needs this renunciation. That every spiritual aspirant, no matter what their station in life is, no matter whether they're a bhakta or a jnani, that bhaktas just leave everything that has nothing that distracts them from their dear divine. Is that not renunciation? They have no use for it. As Sri Ramakrishna said, that's kind of an easy renunciation because your mind is so much here, you don't care about that stuff anymore. That's a kind of renunciation. The Jnanis practice it more kind of viveka, yeah, no, this is not going to be beneficial for me. In other words, everyone uses it. It's a discrimination again. We leave what we feel is going to hinder us. And the interesting thing is that will change as we keep going. And the most interesting thing of all is, because we'll have different ideas at different parts of our spiritual life, they'll be helpful at first, but we may find that we need to renounce even those. And forward and forward and forward, you may have heard of St. John of the Cross's description, dark night of the soul, which the New Age has picked up, and any depression now is dark night of the soul. That's not what it meant. That, oh, I'm having a dark night. No, dark night of the soul is at the final level of this renunciation, where everything that led us to the goal, if we're in the Bhakta tradition, it's our dear divine Lord with form. Whatever it is that has been keeping us going towards the end, we have to renounce even those notions, because that's what they are. And so that's where Sri Ramakrishna says, if you want to pull out a thorn, say we want to pull out these lesser habits in the days before tweezers, how did you do it? You got another thorn, and you used it to pull out the one. But ultimately you threw them both away. So what he meant by that is we have our goal. We have our notions. We have our dear divine Lord. We have our enlightenment, so-called. That our ideas about those things as we experience and as we move forward will change as we have more experience. And one mistake that we might make is to try and cling to what was. And so the dark night of the soul is that moment where a soul or a practitioner has passed so far that they only need to drop the final veil that's dividing them from the ultimate. Call it self, call it God. And to do that, they have to drop even the idea of God. And it's, for them, at first, terrifying. Every single thing we found the most sweet and the most inspiring, we're at the point where we have to drop even that. Now that's a really advanced stage. That's the final, when it all falls and there's nothing then between self and other. There is no self and other, or there's only just a tiny little bit of self and other according to which tradition you aspire to. So we have to be careful to go forward. That, you know that story, yes? I'm going to tell it again, but anyway. It's been told many times. And just recently, one of the trustees at Bellarmont was telling us the story again and pointing something out that I had never thought of before. So I'll tell the story. Woodcutter is told by a sadhu, his teacher, I guess, go forward. So he listens to him, and goes forward, and he finds a sandalwood forest. And he is elated because he's found riches. Now this is an allegory. And so he's happy, but then he says to himself, wait a minute, my teacher told me to go forward. So he goes forward, and I forget, what's the next thing he sees? Silver? Silver. A silver mine. And he's elated because, of course, silver mine is even more valuable than sandal or whatever. And he's about to do something about it to exploit his wonder, and then he realizes, oh, I'm supposed to go forward. So he goes forward, and he catches the gold mine. And he's elated, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And he goes forward, but he says, oh, wait a minute, my teacher told me go forward. So he goes forward, and he reaches to the diamond mine. So the thing that Swami Bhajananda pointed out is obviously this is an allegory. And it talks about states of consciousness, not forests of sandalwood or relative value. It talks about not clinging to one and refusing to go forward. He also pointed out that in order to go forward from a sandalwood forest to the silver mine, you need different tools. And what is necessary at one stage of your spiritual life may require some different tools at the next one. And then, of course, you can't use the gold. Of course, you can't use the big things in a gold mine. You have different tools yet again, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, going forward does not mean we're always going forward in the same universe that we started out in, almost literally. In other words, as our consciousness becomes more and more clear through the practice, we come to a deeper level. That's the other thing. We could say, go forward, dive deep. Don't just be satisfied with a surface thing. Always say, well, what's underneath that? What's underneath that? If we catch a pattern of our mind, and it's like a really surface one, say a dislike of crossing busy streets. That's a pattern we could catch, but what's underneath that? What's underneath that? What's underneath that? What's underneath that? If we catch one and we succeed in what another spiritual teacher said, face, erase, and replace, then we will have the energy and the enthusiasm to go to the next one. If we can do one, then we've unlocked the whole thing, and it's just a matter of continuing, going forward, going forward. Don't cling on to the past. Don't, maybe our notion of form, our notion of name will change. We have that other story that I'm sure you've heard about being too stuck in forms. And who was it? Is his name Gitaprana? I think it is. Who was the Vishnu fanatic. And yes, he had wonderful devotion. Absolutely. Totally one-pointed on his Vishnu. So that's a stage. That's a good place to be in one sense. But the problem with Gitaprana is it was only about his Vishnu and everything else was no. His Vishnu is God and everything else, forget it. So wherever they may reside, the gods, especially Shiva and Vishnu, noticed this and said, we're going to do something about this. And so they manifested together as half Shiva, half Vishnu, while Gitaprana was performing his puja and waving his incense. And what happened? He immediately snuffed the nostril of the Shiva part of the manifestation because he only wanted his Vishnu to, So it seems a little extreme. The story seems a little, but so stories often go to the extreme to illustrate funny little truths in our lives. So we have to ask ourselves, well, where are we sticking our nose up the nose? In other words, where are we acting like Gitaprana? That where are we refusing to move forward? So that's another kind of vairagya. That's another kind of viveka and another kind of vichara. Then, of course, the Yoga Sutras sets out, okay, if I want to do this, how do I do this? It sets it out really clearly. And I have a lot of, met a lot of people who, when they go to the Yoga Sutras, they say, oh, well, we all know that the Vibhuti-pada is the most important part of the book. In other words, the third chapter in the Yoga Sutras is all about the different kinds of miraculous powers you can achieve by concentration of mind. But the Vibhuti-pada is just kind of a dictionary of things that happen. And it has very little to do with the nitty-gritty of realization. So anyway, the real nitty-gritty is in what is called Ashtanga. Ashtanga, the 8 limbs. So called Ashtanga Yoga, not like the Hatha Yoga of the same name. There's 8 limbs. There's 8, it's similar to the Buddhist Eightfold Path in many ways. And actually, these two traditions go hand in. They disagree about the metaphysics, but they don't disagree about the conventional reality at all. So that's where the most parts of Hinduism and Buddhism meet. They may disagree about the nature of the divine, or if there's a divine at all, but they don't disagree at all about our situation here and mind, etc., and the way to realization. So the Buddhists often have taken these very easy instructions to the most detailed degree. How do you do this? How do you do this? But we're going to do the 8 limbs of yoga. So, the first set, which we cannot skip over, sorry, that I've also met a lot of people who say, they want to get right to dhyana and samadhi. But you don't get there without the rest. It's all a nice package, and you cannot do that. So the first of the 8 limbs is yama, external self-discipline, we'll say, external control. Oh, yuck. Now, I know some people, as soon as you say self-discipline, their eyes will start getting glazed and smoke will start coming out of their ears, and they don't want to hear that. Because they grew up, we are the free generation. We don't like that stuff. Down to the institution. All right, so the yamas set the stage for the mind. They make sure that we have at least an external guide for whether or not our mind is fooling us. Somebody was asking. Teresa, I think you were, right? How do we know if our mind is fooling us? And that was the question I used to ask all the time when I was a kid. How do I know my mind isn't fooling me, even though I'm theoretically following a spiritual path? So, ahimsa, non-harmfulness. Himsa means to harm. So ahimsa means non-harmfulness. And it's up to each one of us to discern what is harmful and what is harmless in our situation. And to understand that life itself is slightly harmful. That, as the Upanishad says, everything is either the consumer or the consumed. That life lives upon itself. So although some have a spiritual path of striving for perfect non-harmfulness, it's always going to be a mixed bag, but aiming for non-harmfulness is the point here. How in thought, word, and deed. And I have a funny story about this. And when I was in Los Angeles, I belonged to an interfaith group. And this interfaith group was an action group. It had gone past long before the discussion stage of interfaith, and it was the most interfaith group I've ever been in. And it was the most diverse, and there were equal representatives, at least of the big 3 Western religions, and there was a few Buddhists and a couple Hindus. There was equal representation of men and women. There was equal representation of clergy and lay people. There was people from every race, so many ethnicities, and had worked out over many, many weeks and fights like crazy positions that they could all agree on in various things. So, now why was I telling this? Oh, yes. It was a group that was largely liberal, and so I'm going to tell it in this context. This was during the Iraq War, and you can imagine that in that group, our ex-president was not very popular. And he was reelected and was going to give an inauguration speech or whatever again. And so the minister of the local church that was part of the group decided, well, we'll share the pain and we'll all watch it together in our church. So about 300 people came, and he invited one of the ministers who had trained Martin Luther King in nonviolent ahimsa, in his nonviolent techniques. And he had met Gandhi, and he was going to give a commentary after the inauguration speech, who was African American. And so he got up and he said, I have been practicing these things for almost 80 years. And I have made it the goal of my life. And I've done pretty well. But I still have to say that when I watch that man's face, those waves of wanting to kill him come up. And he was being kind of tongue-in-cheek. He was being kind of funny. But what he means is that ahimsa means those waves don't really arise at all. And he knew this was somebody who, by our standards, would be far advanced in this practice of ahimsa. Someone who actually was marching in the South and got beat up and sprayed with fire hoses and thrown in jail and da-da-da-da, still felt like these things could arise in his mind. So it's not so easy. The next one is satya, truthfulness. Sri Ramakrishna said, truth is the austerity of the age, and there is a reason why. But you have to understand we have to discern for ourselves what that reason is. That truthfulness is absolutely necessary in spiritual life. It doesn't mean that you're always bluntly telling the truth to everybody else. It means self-truthfulness, that we want to get to the truth of it. Not asteya, not stealing. Well, that's obviously going to go against any kind of attachment and wanting to acquire. Yeah? That if we practice now, not stealing seems, oh yeah, no problem. But what if we're stealing other people's ideas? Maybe not even consciously. That occasionally as a sadhana, I do some kind of arts and crafts. And in the craft movement, in the scrapbooking movement, they have a word called scrap lifting, where you see an artist has done a kind of technique and then you steal it for yourself. That there's many kinds of stealing. That scrap lifting, you give the artist their due and don't say, I learned this from X. I learned this from Yoga Sutras. I learned this from so-and-so. Not, I thought it up myself. There's many kinds of stealing we might do. Now, we could get even more radical and say, okay, we live in a culture that lives on stealing, folks. So how are we going to deal with that? Are there ways in our personal life that we can minimize that? In other words, say we all probably have heard that if, say, even the United States would stop eating beef, that the world population could be fed. Things like that. Whatever it is and however we understand that, how are we going to manifest unstealing in our life? And it will be different for everyone. Brahmacharya. Obviously, most often translated as celibacy, has another meaning, and that is exactly what it says. Brahma Acharya means conduct with the goal of Brahman in mind. We can also say Brahmacharya means if we are not living monastic lives, that we are practicing absolute monogamy in thought, word, and deed. In other words, we're not taking advantage of anyone else. And nobody is an object. And aparigraha means not clinging, not grabbing onto things, not keeping, that's another one that will go against raga and dvesha. And not to mention not clinging to one's own identity so radically. I am the perfect one. I am a monk. I am the boss. Clinging on to whatever our identity is, so much so that we can't move forward. So those are the yamas, these external things that we practice. Not harming the truth, thinking, speaking in the truth. not stealing, not exploiting others and acting in a way that's in accord with our goal, and not clinging on to things. And then there's the internal ones. Now, the external ones we can deal with because we're pretty good at external things. But internal things we're not so good at. So, shocha. Cleanliness, purity. That we need to think. And of course, it means external, but we're talking about the internal. Purity means that we strive always, assuming we're sitting here because we're interested in realizing the divine, yeah? I'm making that assumption, or that we think we might be, or something like that. We've given up a Saturday to listen, and that's something pretty extraordinary, especially in this culture. When so many other options, like the airlines, we know you have other choices of airlines. We know you have so many options for doing something else with your Saturday, but you're sitting here. And that already is more than half the battle. We want to know. So that already indicates a certain, what we would call, level of purity. We're sorting out what we're acting in consonant with our goal. We want to deify, we want to transcend, however you want to call it. Unless, of course, we leave here and, well, never mind. We may have mixed, but that's what we're aiming for. We wouldn't be sitting here. Then here's the hard one. Santosha, contentment. Now, what does that mean? If we're going to practice Santosha and complain at the same time, are we? Even little complaining? What are we doing when we complain? Sometimes even mindlessly. Or as one person originally says, I'm French. French people complain. That when we complain, what is it? It's a kind of rejection. I don't like this.
We complain about French,
Yeah. Or we complain about complaining. So, but that's if we're practicing Santosha, that's an attitude of mind that whatever is coming up in our life, we accept it, whether we consider it painful or pleasant, with equanimity. Okay, this is it. We are accepting it. This day I have to go because my mother is in the hospital and and my husband won't clean up the house, and doesn't he know? No, he doesn't. Or maybe he does. But complaining is a rejection, a rejection. We don't like it. So we practice contentment. We practice, okay, let's see what happens next. The attitude of a virya, the attitude of a strong person, just is open to what happens next, whether it be pleasant, so-called, or unpleasant, so-called. Santosha, contentment, all right? It does not say it should not be this way. Now you're going to say, well, if you practice that, then how can there ever, you'll just be allowing all this suffering to go on in the world and practice contentment? You're going to be content with that? Again, we can't make a sweeping, what do you call that? Generalization. That, no, we have, at some point in each one of us has some kind of capability where we say, no, I'm going to try and do this for this. But we're not going to solve all the world's problems in a day, or year, or even 100 years. And actually, the truth of the matter is, for each one of us, the world's problems are out of our hands. However, we do act in every moment, and we have choices in every moment. And so in those moments, to practice, nowadays it's called acceptance. Radical acceptance. There's a book by that name. And that is contentment. We're not saying no automatically. The next one is tapas, austerity, which is another thing that we don't like. Especially if you grew up in this culture where freedom is the thing, and anything that tells me that I have to do anything is the empire. It's the down with the institution. Why should I do it just because somebody tells me that I have to? And Swami Sarvadevananda was asking me when he was new, well, Gitaprana, when you joined, what did your friends think? And I said to him, well, my friends thought that following a spiritual path was wonderful. And they said to me, we know and we understand that you want to follow a spiritual path, but we can't understand is, why did you sell yourself to the institution? So, and Swami Sarvadevananda was shocked because, of course, he's coming from a different view entirely. But in my generation, even doing something as radically different as joining the Vedanta Society is selling oneself to the institution. Sell out. So, tapas, austerity, means basically, it can mean something extreme. You know, like the Naga Babas who keep their hands up in the air for their entire life. That's austerity. But there's many other smaller austerities. There's austerity of choosing other over oneself. There's the austerity of just little tiny austerities. When we see our mind going for that donut, we say no. There's the austerity of when everything in our mind is saying, no, I'm not getting out of bed now. Just 5 more minutes. We get up. And austerity of saying, no, I think I'm going to skip my meditation today because my back hurts. We go. And what in austerity is the critical thing, do you think? Got any idea? Yeah, and when we're disciplined, what are we doing? Yeah, we're using our choice and going against the inclination of our mind. That using a choice to choose the shreya, what is more beneficial to us, over the preya, what we would rather be doing. I'd rather be taking a nap. I'd rather la 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 la. So, and every time we do this, we make that habit of choosing the beneficial stronger. And we lessen the power of going with what we'd rather be doing. Svadhyaya, study. There's 2 ways, of course, to look at this. One is the external way. We have to, here I'm going to reveal my generation. I have to tell you, I grew up in Berkeley during the hippie generation. I was a little young, but nevertheless, that was all going on, and the whole scene was going on. So I'm going to use that terminology. You probably don't remember the Jefferson Airplane, or never even heard about it, and Grace Slick, who said, feed your head. And of course, I think she was talking about drugs, but what I'm talking about is in order to go against our pattern that tells us I'm an individual, separate person in a huge universe, I need to feed my head with whatever it is, whatever scripture, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the Bhagavad Gita, whatever are my scriptures that remind me continuously of the truth, the way it inspires me. And so I want to feed my head in 2 ways. I want to feed my head with the things that I like. Say if I'm a gospel person, a Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna person, whatever is I love, I want to feed my head with it. But I don't want to get into the position where I say, well, I'll only listen to Sri Ramakrishna and forget Swami Vivekananda because I don't really like him. That's following a little, we want to feed our head with some new things too. In other words, we need to pour these ideas continuously into our mind. And the other meaning of swadhyaya is I need to study myself. That otherwise, if I don't know, if I'm not aware of the tendencies that pop up in my mind automatically, then they'll pop up and I might not even be aware of it. And they will, because there's so many layers upon layers of them. And so we get a hold of one, and pretty soon we've dug down and seen another one, and the layer, right down to where in the Yoga Sutras it says, the yogis who have this discerning ability can discern before a thought arises in their mind and stop it then. We can't even imagine that. That we have an idea that, yeah, when it's full blown, we can recognize it and say no and struggle with it. But not even a thought, it's an impulse to think. It's not even a thought yet. It's this almost like the precursor of thought. The yogis can understand that and right there. And it seems almost impossible, but with some meditation and self-inquiry, it's not that impossible. Anybody could do it. Swami Vivekananda said, if I can do this, anyone can do this. Which, actually, that kept me going my whole life. Swami Vivekananda emphatically, and also the Gautama Buddha, the Buddha said, if one person can do this, we can all do this. So one of our most obstruction-causing beliefs is, I can't do it. I'm just a small person. That, why do you think these people were born? Because we can't do it? There's no point then. A Sri Ramakrishna, a Buddha, Swami Vivekananda. If we couldn't do it, why bother? So, we can, and anyhow, what is it there to do? We have to undo. And we can all do that. And then the last one is Ishvara Pranidhana, which everyone is going to understand differently. But it means a focus on the divine. However way, whether you're a natural at being devotional path, whether you're a natural at the path of knowledge, whether you're a natural at karma yoga, whether you're a natural at meditation. In other words, there has to be a goal. And of course, ultimately we see there really is no separation between ourselves and our goal, and ever. And there never was, and it was only apparent. So that's the two you cannot skip. We cannot skip those two. We can't skip any of the 8 limbs, but a lot of people, as you can understand, would love to skip those. How do we orient ourselves in the world? So the next one, of course, is asana, which we ordinarily think of as our posture. And we were reading that in the Raja Yoga this morning. We have to find in a seat and sit, and our spine is to be aligned, etc. And that's true. There has to be a posture, but it also means what is our seat in life? What is our asana in life? Are we just going to go willy-nilly to the next moment, looking for something that we know not what? Are we going to take a seat right here, right now? Yes, I'm going to try, however long it may take, as we said in the visualization that we did at the beginning, whether it's taking years, whether it takes decades, whether it takes many lifetimes, I'm going for it. And that resolution itself has huge power. So asana, obviously our meditation seat. And of course, Hatha Yoga is aimed at making asana easier on the external level. All the 84 postures, so that when we sit for our meditation, we are not tortured by our body, who doesn't want to sit. And also, more than that, also, so the energies of our body are in alignment as well. The next thing, pranayama, controlling of the prana, the life breath, which of course I think probably most of you know, in China is known as chi, and Japan is known as ki, and India known as prana. this living life force that we have some control over with our breath and our mind. That is there anyone here who, besides yoga, is there anyone here who practice Aikido, Tai Chi, Qigong, any of those so-called martial arts? Yeah. And we know when we practice these things, we learn how to move energy in our body, how to move the chi, how to move the prana. How do we do this? With our mind, as well as moving movements. That where our mind is, where our focus is, there will be the energy. And people can do what seem to be miraculous things. I've seen it myself, where your average human being cannot be lifted by 6 huge men because they've put their prana, their chi, in such a way that it's not movable. I've seen your average Aikido practitioner not let 6 huge men push him over just with his hand like this, while they, one after the other, are pushing as hard as they can, and then with his mind, make them all fall back. So it's possible. So pranayama is the introduction, the control of, instead of letting them just control us, we learn how to use them. And the key to that, as Swami Vivekananda said, is through the breath. So one of the limbs of yoga is learning through the breath. And many of the meditation traditions teach that. We focus on breathing. We focus on our in-breath. We focus on our out-breath. We count our breaths. We notice that when we are calm, our breath is calm. And when we are agitated, our breath is agitated. And when we are scared, we're holding it. So, and we notice that we can produce these effects. You know, if you want to agitate yourself, if you want to wake yourself up, if you know the different kinds of pranayama, you can practice these. Wake yourself up really fast. We know if we've practiced pranayama that they indeed cause the mind to feel peaceful and sometimes even blissful. And then if we are Westerners and we're kind of dumb and we have this idea that if a little bit is good, more is better, we overkill it and get ourselves in a little bit of trouble. Because, hey, if I'm feeling peaceful and blissful and I did this with just think if I did it way more than that. So a little bit of discipline needs to be included in all this. Then we have Pratyahara. That's the next rung. These are actually meditation instructions, but they work for off the mat as well. Pratyahara means when we sit down to meditate or concentrate on something other than the TV that will immediately grab our attention or our cell phone, what happens? When we sit down to meditate and our intention is to watch our breath, okay, so we're counting our breath. How many breaths do we get counted before what happens? Maybe we fall asleep, but that's not what I mean. Mind goes somewhere else and we lose count at about 4 or 5. And we can all laugh because it's common to everybody. If we're just not, yeah. And so when mind goes off, we could go off with it for quite a while. That we're sitting there and we hear something. At Ridgely, there's some birds that when they chirp, they sound just like our fire alarm. And so we could be sitting there and hear those birds. And of course, if you're Gitaprana and it's your responsibility to know what's going on around you, and you hear this and you think, is that the fire alarm? Or is that a bird? And then you start listening to the birds, and then you start thinking, oh, well, I don't hear a catbird. Maybe they left for the winter, and oh, the winter's coming. Did we have enough snow shovels, or do I need to send somebody to buy them? And if we're going to buy them, oh, maybe I'll send Bill. Oh, Bill can't go because da-da-da. So what? And pretty soon we've gone off for 15 minutes from our meditation, and we don't even know it. So at some point we're going to become aware, oh, I'm sitting here and with an intention to meditate. And we bring our mind back. That's Pratyahara. This constant just catching and bringing it back. Now, what happens if we catch it and we say, I can't do this. That's for monks. But I'm a householder. And I have too many responsibilities and my mind is going to be all over. I can't do this. I'm going to fail. Then we've added another stream, as I said before, another stream of distraction here. And so now we've got two little streams, and we have to catch ourselves from both. It's not about whether we succeed or fail. It's about coming back to the seat with our mind. And every time we do that, it actually is training us. We're moving forward. And the problem is not that we can't control our mind so much as we have expectations that in the next 10 seconds we're going to have samadhi. Or the next 10 minutes or the next 10 years. That we have an expectation here. We have set a whole thing up about our meditation. All we need to do is show up and put the mind where our instructions for meditation, where our teachers have said or whatever. So that act of bringing the mind back sets up our awareness of how our mind moves around it all. And pretty soon that app starts auto-loading and we're much better at bringing the mind back. And pretty soon, on a good day, we're pretty focused. And so that comes to the next step, dharana. Dharana means we're focused, but we gotta keep our mind there. Because, in other words, there's some will going on. Again, it's hard to describe unless when you experience it. Next time you sit down to meditate and you're having a good focused so-called good focused meditation, see if your mind is like acting like the tape to keep itself there. In other words, there's a part of your mind that's acting like a chain. That there is volition going on to keep your mind on your ishtam or whatever. It's not just effortless. You need effort. And if you have a visualization kind of meditation, you may find that you're having a pretty good visualization, but it's wanting to move because mind is wanting to move. But you can feel it. You can feel that image is wanting to move, not like a human, but almost like a movie that's gotten out of its track. That mind is wanting to go somewhere else. That's dharana, but it's still staying there. In other words, we have to keep it there. And but again, there's a problem if we start making it into a big effort. So that you look out, say we were all meditating, and I looked out, and some people would be going. And in other words, it's become a struggle. Again, problematic. It should be just kind of peaceful. Yes, we have to make a will and it's going to shake, but it's not. It's not a battle here. So if we're doing this, we can be pretty sure that we've got a thought that says, I should be doing it right. That because in meditation, you can't really do it wrong. All you can do is start where you are and start bringing your mind back and back and back and back. And know that that's what the rest of us are doing on any given day. And some of us can be more focused, and some of us may be focused, have very many good dharana-like meditations, and the next day have what we would call a rotten one, where our mind just won't go there. And what will happen? We got attached to the so-called good ones. That now we've had a good meditation and we spend our whole meditation time trying to get back there. We're clinging. That we won't accept the reality of what is happening right here, right now, and instead we're trying to get back to that state that we experienced before. So that also is not what we want to do. That mind will have many ups and downs in our meditation practice and in our life, and some days it will just click and other days it won't. And what do? We just show up at the mat second by second and bring our mind back and bring our mind back and don't make any judgments on it or any expectations. And just, if we really want, if we have a devotional path and our mind is not behaving, we can say, oh, Mother, look what you've cooked up for me today. But anyway, we try without saying, oh, I can't do it, I can't do it. Then dhyana is the next limb. Dhyana is mind being fixed effortlessly. Now it's like, and the best equivalent of that is watching TV or a movie. And you go to a good movie and you forget that you're just watching images on a screen and that you're sitting in the movie theater and there are people next to you eating popcorn and the person behind you is talking to his friend. You totally are absorbed, which is, by the way, what we're doing at every moment of our life, watching the movie. We're watching flickering motions and calling it a movie. Anyway, we're doing exactly that. But the point I'm trying to make is, with that absorption, we've forgotten everything around us. Or reading a good book. We're so interested that we don't know that we burned. This happened at Ridgely too. Somebody was making their breakfast and they got so interested in what they were reading, they forgot that their breakfast was on the stove and it started smoke and, of course, called the fire department as it hit our fire alarm. So we don't know what's going on around us, and he was hardly even aware of that. So in this kind of dhyana, our meditation is just effortlessly fixed. And it just flows, and there's no trying to keep it there. And it's just is, for a better word. And nothing around us, we are not aware, or barely aware. And that kind of dhyana then moves on to the next run, samadhi, total 100% absorption, concentration. Now there is nothing. Totally not aware of anything outside and barely aware, there's many kinds of samadhi, barely aware that there's a me there. There's only the highest kind of samadhi, there's only that one. That in other kinds of samadhi, there might be a shred of me there. But the blur of separation is going away. This illusion of separation, gone in some way or another. There's, again, if you go out through the different Indian traditions and different ashrams around here and throw the word samadhi around, you will find many different understandings about what it means. And many different kinds of samadhi. Say, for instance, Sri Ramakrishna's example of Sahaja Samadhi Vijnana. That kind of, not so much, it's a state almost beyond this one we're talking about, that's beyond the 8 limbs, where once that notion of separation is permanently erased, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are permanently erased. And so that person eventually starts to perceive this world again, but we are never, ever fooled by the appearance ever again. Actually, that's not even the highest. The so-called highest would be that everywhere we look, as Swami Yogatmanandaji was saying, literally is the divine. That a person like Sri Ramakrishna could see that. Everything that he saw, he was not separate from, for one thing. At least not, he may observe the conventional separation, but the notion that it was separate was not in his mind. It was all the mother. It was all Brahman. It was not, well, there's this object and somehow they appear to be different, but it's nothing but her. So that's the state of living in this world with the obstructions erased. And you might remember the story where, as Sri Ramakrishna was about to pass away, or maybe it was before, and he asked Narendra, who became Swami Vivekananda, well, what do you want? And Narendra said, samadhi. I want nirvikalpa samadhi. In other words, this kind of samadhi where there is nothing and no one. Only the one. And Sri Ramakrishna said, you fool, there is something else. You only want that for yourself. And went on to describe the state of vijnana, the state of living in this conventional reality with all delusion erased. With all the illusion. Now we're living in the dream, but 100% we know it's the dream. So, which is the ultimate. So those are the stages. I think I'm about at the end of, I'm a little over, as a matter of fact, the coffee break time. This is the general description of kind of how we go against the pattern, or better yet, how we use the pattern to our own advantage. And until we don't need it anymore. And so Sri Ramakrishna and others have said, well, there's two kinds of Maya. The Maya, of course, is the illusion of separation, or whatever, however you're going to explain it. There's two kinds. There's the kind that causes the separation, the illusion to arise, and the avidya Maya. We've been talking about avidya, the unknowing. And there's the vidya Maya, the kind within this notion of separation, the kind that leads us away from the illusion. We have to work within this conventional world. So we use the terms of the conventional world in order to erase the very obstructions that lead us to experience it this way. So we use what put us to sleep to wake us up, sort of. And so I think I'll stop there. Pretty basically, we've talked about, according to the Indian notion, how mind is constructed. This thing that isn't a thing called mind. Starting with avidya and then leading all through, and which things catch us, the kleshas, and what they are, whether they're attachments or attachment, greed, etc., delusion, unknowing, aversions, ignorance, pride, those kind of things. How they might be operating, and how they might be operating in a habitual way in our life, and how when we act on those things that make our mind unsettled, we make them stronger, and how we go against those things and choose deliberately to act in a different way, we make them weaker, and how we want to pour the opposite into our mind and hearts continuously to create the new program that says divine. And really that's the most important, in the sense that if you imagine the kleshas, the whole thing as the tree of life, how we get caught in this endless loop of so-called of life, it starts with the unknowing, and then it's a tree. The trunk is the asmita, or the ahankara, the I, and then the attraction, aversion, and clinging are the branches. So when we work on our destructive emotions and things, what we're doing is hacking at the branches. But does that get rid of the tree? You can keep on hacking and hacking and hacking, and it's necessary. We have to stop the growth, but it doesn't. And if we cut it at the trunk, at the eye, shall I erase the eye? Out you go. I don't like you. You still have the trunk, and if you are living in India where there's any kind of fig tree, or Los Angeles or Florida, you know that tomorrow it will be back. And if you can cut it at the trunk. Boom, new shoot. So what you really have to do is to get rid of the root. And the root here is that unknowing. And that's why pouring in the opposite notion, in other words, the swadhyaya, the pouring in the scriptures, pouring in these ideas, keeping holy company, going aside in a retreat like this, where we're not on our usual program, a chance to focus on these things. Just pour it, pour it, pour it till it becomes the dominant app. And it auto-loads before anything else. And it tricks to do that. Say, many people I know have little tricks in their lives. When you wake up, the first thing you do is you look at a holy picture or you repeat a mantra. The first thing that comes out of your mouth has to be something that connects you to the divine. Little things. Before you go up the stairs, you stop and repeat a mantra. Before you put on your clothes, you repeat another mantra. Before you answer the phone, you can breathe and be mindful. Whatever it is. What are these all doing? They're pouring and pouring and pouring and pouring the new app, the new idea into the mind. That by itself will start, what do you call that? A little app that erases everything else. It's like in this case, it's the opposite of malware. It's malware for our delusions. And it will go on working even if we're not really consciously paying attention. A mantra, good malware. That it will go on working on those programs, even when our mind is elsewhere. But to do that, we have to pour it in. That it won't just go on working if we say, okay, I repeated it 10 times, or it has to be poured in there. And it has to be something that's, one Swami I know says, your main spiritual practice should be something you love and not something that you hate. Because if it's something that you find really difficult, you won't do it. And so you'll just think about doing it, but you won't. So you have to pour it in there, something you love, and then you work at the other things that are more difficult too. But make sure you don't drop the spiritual practices that you love. Whether it's singing, what is the inspiring thing? What makes it so you happily pour all this in your head? And then you work at the others as well. The more so-called difficult ones. So I think that's pretty much it.